right. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Same Old Stripes podcast. It's a 2-for-1 week. Today, we've got a really fun episode for you guys. Me and T.O. we're going to interview Brad Spielberger from Pro Football Focus here in just a minute. He provided us so much good insight on the Bengals free agency class, in terms of, not only the players they landed, but how those deals are going to affect the Bengals down the road. He gave us a really good breakdown of how Joe Burrow's contract extension might affect the Tee Higgins extension in the future. Really good information from him. I'm very excited for you guys to hear that interview in just a minute. Did want to hit on one piece of relative news. Today is Wednesday morning. Later last night, it got announced that the Bengals were going to host Trevor Siemian, quarterback, in for a visit. You guys probably recognize that name, and I'll tell you why I think it's really interesting. So for me, Brandon Allen wasn't getting the job done, so I think it's really exciting. The Bengals have kind of transitioned to looking for that next backup for Joe Burrow, and it doesn't really necessarily matter because you're not winning a whole lot without Joe Burrow being healthy for the whole season anyway. But, we talk about a guy like Trevor Siemian. He was a Super Bowl champion as a backup with the Broncos. He has 35 starts as an NFL quarterback, 30 starts as an NFL quarterback. He is 13-17 in those games, so really not bad. 42-28 touchdown interception ratio. Little under 60% completion rate for his career. He's obviously not going to be a game changer for the Bengals, but I am all about them going out, attacking the backup quarterback position. It's just a little more valuable. Someone that can move the ball at the end of games if the Bengals are up big, someone that can come in and you can feel comfortable throwing a few passes if Joe Burrow's nicked up, or even making a start if something happens where Burrow has to miss a week. Obviously, Joe Burrow is not a guy that's easy to keep out of games, but I think the inclusion of Trevor Siemian could be really exciting. Siemian's played on 4 teams throughout his career. He was with the Broncos from 15-17, the Jets in 2019, the Saints in 21 and 22, and last season he was with the Chicago Bears. Nothing real crazy on that front. Something could get done today, something might not. They've also met with Purdue quarterback Aiden O'Connell, who is a projected 6th or 7th round draft pick, so they might address the backup quarterback position even in the draft. But I wanted to make sure I gave you guys that little tidbit before we get into today's show. Other than that, man, I hope you guys are having a really fun run up to the draft. This will kind of end our free agency kind of coverage on Same Old Stripes, at least temporarily. We might give you a little bonus episode if something happens with Siemian, just something quick. But I really hope you guys enjoy this interview with Brad Spielberger. Really fun to put together. Really smart guy on all things contract related around the NFL. So I hope you enjoy this, and hooday. Joining us now on the Same Old Stripes podcast, he is a salary cap wizard, I think is the appropriate title for him over at Pro Football Focus, and also has a background. He's a lawyer, everyone. If you look at his Twitter, he has the little Esquire tag on his name. Brad Spielberger, you're not here to tell us any laws. You're not here to get us on any treason charges or anything. You're here to talk free agency with us. But how are you tonight, man? How are things going?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, man.
Right on. So I feel a little weird not starting with the Orlando Brown contract because it's so fascinating. I feel like that'd be the natural avenue to start with you. But as I was kind of looking through some of the stuff you've written recently, one of the things that really stood out to me was your piece on 5 boomer bust signings for the 2023 NFL free agency period, and obviously relevant to the Bengals. One of the guys you had on that list was Irv Smith Jr. Obviously, I read it, but for everyone that didn't listen, I'm interested on some of your thoughts on his, first of all, his fit with the Bengals, and obviously the injury history is a part of that. Is that really the big downside you see? So I'm kind of just curious, the upside or the downside to you of that signing.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually had some comments that I agree with, but they were saying, like, what do you mean bust? Like, worst case scenario, it's a $1.75 million deal. I think in that example, the bust was more just the team not having, quality tight end play, right? So it wasn't about, if Irv Smith doesn't play well, they wasted all this money. Like, no, they'll be okay. But yeah, the upside's huge. I get that he's had injuries every single year, but, also in my bio, I interned with the Minnesota Vikings, still friends over there. And I know that every team, every offseason, you get the classic, like, one player is getting the training camp buzz. He's going to have a breakout year. He's going to be great. That is Irv Smith every single offseason in Minnesota. Unfortunately, he then gets hurt. And last year he had some drop issues. He, I think had a lack of confidence in the games, but you still see on film, like he can get open downfield. He has good burst after the catch. He can make guys miss on occasion. I think there was just a little bit of a loss of confidence. And, frankly, you tie it to Hayden Hurst, formerly highly drafted guy, kind of doesn't go well on his first team. And then when he gets to a change of scenery, maybe has a good year, it's almost the exact same narrative. So, yeah, the ceiling's pretty high. Like, Joe Burrow likes targeting that position. We all know that. He is a good athlete. He's good, I think, down in the red area at creating short-term separation as well, not just downfield separating. He's not a great blocker, but he's a fine blocker. And, of course, the downside is, he gets hurt and doesn't play. But, again, the more so the downside is, do they bring back Drew Sample? Do they, how good is Devin Asiasi going to be? Do they use a first-round pick on tight end? Like, that's more of the conversation there.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to look. I mean, the injury thing really is the thing for me and I feel like tight end injuries are kind of nature of the beast at this point, but he's really had some injury history. He is 24. And that down the field explosiveness and all that kind of stuff isn't going to go away at 24. That's not going to be the injuries catching up to him at this age. So that's interesting from your perspective. I'm excited to hear that. Tio, I always feel like I run right through you and don't let you get a question in for a minute. What do you got brewing in your Marion, man? What you got for Brad?
Yeah, I got one. I'm going to stick on the offensive side. First of all, Brad, thanks for joining us, man. It's awesome to have you. But I guess, at this point in free agency, it's kind of just bargain bin. Don't really expect anyone to get a huge contract at this point, maybe outside of Odell. Kidding. But my question for you is, what would be like another value signing the Bengals could do on the offense? Either offensive line, like guy for me is like Dalton Reisner, maybe Isaiah Wynn, really to shore up that side of the ball. But what would you, what would you see as a value signing that the Bengals could do?
Swing tackle does make a good bit of sense, especially, if they do go ahead and trade Jonah Williams. We don't know yet, but talk about injuries. Lyle Collins is a great player, but obviously has an extensive injury history in his own right. There's a reason his contract in Cincinnati has a ton of per game roster bonuses. It's because they're protecting against injuries that they kind of expected, and that's obviously been the case so far. So, you mentioned, one of the higher end guys like an Isaiah Wynn. I think George Fant, I know he had a bad year with the Jets last year, but was a good player before that. I think Cam Fleming took a visit somewhere this week, but is a guy that can play on the left side and the right side as well. I would look to that market, 1 year flyer for $3 million, maybe even less at this point, on a guy that can play on both sides of the line at tackle.
So I got to stay on the offensive line now that we've arrived at this point. I think that I brought it up top, but I think it's time to talk about Orlando Brown Jr. And it's a contract that you listed as one of the most team-friendly contracts of the free agency cycle, at least in the early period. I'm sure, it's probably still got to be, just given all things considered. But just kind of how do you feel about the way this deal fell for the Bengals? In terms of you're ideally paying Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Tee Higgins, if you ask anyone here in Cincinnati. And you got to start setting up things for the future. So from that context, how much do you like for that deal for the Bengals? And then especially in the context of what, a team like the Broncos paid for a guy like Mike McGlinchey, and the Chiefs ended up doing, for Jawan Taylor, a guy that they're going to move from right tackle to left tackle for a lot more money.
Yeah, no, 100%. And the thing there is, you could actually make an argument that I know it sounds weird and kind of contradictory, but getting a tackle on this good a value deal could actually help you keep Tee Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow, because you're not then having to chase other players, use early draft picks. Like maybe you think you have to draft a tackle at 28. Now you have flexibility there. Or if let's say you make that pick, it doesn't work, and then you're still chasing that and going after players. So it's the best value contract for a team of the offseason. I don't think that will change. I guess maybe you could argue like Geno Smith. That's a little bit of a different conversation. But for Brown, look, I know there's a whole narrative. Look, is he one of the best tackles in the NFL? No. Is he a very good tackle? Yes. Like a very, very good player. You mentioned a couple other comps. Laremy Tunsil signed a 3-year, $75 million extension. A couple weeks later, Orlando Brown's making $50 million over 3 years. Like literally 2/3 of his deal. Is Tunsil better? Yes. Is he literally, that much better? I would argue no. So. And the structure of it, too, where you do have the huge first-year cash outlay, which is classic Bengals. You have to do that. He's making $16 million over the second and third year combined of this contract. So from a structure standpoint, from a lot of different angles, it's just great value for the team. He is a very good player, and you're getting – look, so he had a $16 million franchise tag this past season. You fold that in – he makes $80 million over 5 years. you can just compare to, he had an offer on the table from Kansas City that paid him $95 over the first 5 years of the deal. Like, he's getting $15 million less than what he could have taken over the same 5-year period, and he won a Super Bowl. Again, you can argue how good is he? Is he top 12? Like, who cares? Like, he's a good player on a good value contract.
Speaking of good players on good value contracts, I'm going to talk about a great player that's going to become a very expensive contract very soon. I actually didn't have this in my notes, but as you were kind of talking about it, it just had me thinking, just from your perspective, I'm curious, how interested are you to watch these quarterback extensions hit over the next couple of months? And I think that the two we know are probably going to hit are Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. And obviously Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson are right there along with them. But for someone like you who's very interested in, the way teams allocate their money. I mean, you spent time at Over the Cap, you worked with the Minnesota Vikings. You've thought a lot about how teams are putting money into different things. So the quarterback situations in particular, how much are you interested to, monitor the trends of, the cash, and also how teams are weaponizing that going forward? Is that something you're already thinking about for the Bengals?
The timing of this podcast couldn't be funnier. I submitted an article that'll be posted tomorrow about extensions for the 3 players you just mentioned, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. I'll talk about Tua Tagovailoa as well. Submitted that 2 hours ago to my editor for publish tomorrow. So it dives into, kind of what metrics I'm looking at, how I arrive at the eventual projection I do give for those 4 guys. I'm obsessed with it. I think it's going to be fascinating. There are obviously so many different angles here. Everyone, of course, talks about the fully guaranteed thing with Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson. I kind of get into that a little bit before diving into each player specifically. But, yeah, I think it's going to be a really, really interesting offseason because what these quarterbacks choose to prioritize is going to shape the future for a bit. Like, we always, of course, get guys come up every year, really good players. The market's always going to grow. But I mean, it's kind of been since 2019 when we had Patrick Mahomes and then Deshaun Watson. We haven't had 2 elite young talents come up. 2020 class, we got Kyler, then we got Daniel Jones. But now in the 2018 class, I guess, we got Josh Allen. We're still waiting on Lamar Jackson. Didn't get Mayfield Darnold. So we're getting 2, Herbert and Burrow should both be, one should become the highest paid player in the NFL history. And then the next should be Burrow, should surpass him shortly thereafter and reset the market again. It's just, I think what's going to be cooler is how are they both going to get over? As you guys, of course, know, the Bengals are not fully guaranteeing a contract. So what is he going to get in return? What concessions is he going to ask for? Him and his camp, his agency, that's going to be fascinating.
I agree. It's going to be fascinating. And the most fascinating part of it for me right now, Bengals fan me, stupid orange and black brain me, the implication of what that means for Tee Higgins in particular, because I don't see a world where the Bengals are letting Jamar Chase go anywhere anytime soon. So for you, I mean, what are the indicators in the Joe Burrow contract that could mean Tee Higgins will fit in their future plans? I mean, they might try to do it one way or another, but just from your perspective, I mean, what does a quarterback contract need to include in order to protect a guy like Tee Higgins, that other guy you want to keep on the roster, having the ability to keep someone like that?
It's a great question. And I'll say, I took a bunch of flack, understandably so. I, mock traded Tee Higgins to, I forget even who it was at this point. And the point wasn't that I actually think the Bengals are going to do that. They're not really in the business of trading away elite young talent. But I do think it's going to be very interesting if it comes around August and he still has not been extended. And we've seen, last offseason, a guy like Deebo Samuel make a trade request. Obviously didn't happen. And then, A.J. Brown makes a trade request, does get traded. I'm sure if an extension didn't come for Terry McLaurin and DK Metcalf, they would have done the same thing. So I don't think he's going to get traded. I think realistically, I'll get into what an extension could look like and how we could get there. But if not, I think he plays out the deal, maybe gets franchise tag. But I just, the reason I put that in there is I think it's going to be a bit of a battle in that negotiation. So what Burrow can do, it's not about the total money he takes. It's not about guarantees, any of that. What Patrick Mahomes did on his deal was take dramatically lower early year cash flows. So we always talk about all these numbers, guarantee. The really thing that matters most of all is just pure up cash flow. And so Mahomes in the early years of his deal enabled Travis Kelce and Chris Jones and I guess Frank Clark and Tyreek Hill before they moved on, a bunch of these guys, because he wasn't getting a ton of cash early, they were able to retain all of these players. Of course, they obviously move on from Tyreek Hill. So if Burrow, but the way they did that is, while Mahomes also didn't get, some gigantic full guarantee number, there's that rolling guarantee structure you maybe heard about where he basically is protected. this offseason, his 2025 money becomes fully guaranteed. Next offseason is 2026. Like, if they want to get out of the deal, they pay him $100-something million to not play for them for 3 years. So Burrow can do the same thing, which is lower early year cash flows, but the Bengals would have to concede on essentially you're going to get almost the entirety of this deal no matter what. We're just not going to fully guarantee it at signing. That's how he can help Tee Higgins out if he wants to.
Man, that's fascinating. Really great information. I don't have to listen back to that and think about all that because there's really good nuggets in there. The rolling guarantees is something I've heard a few times, so it's interesting to hear you bring it up again. Tio, man, I'm hogging the whole microphone, man. What do you got on your? I love the Tee Higgins answer. Thank you very much, by the way. That's great information for me.
Yeah, we're always curious about Tee Higgins, man. I think
most
of us want him locked up for sure. I'm going to shift to the defensive side, man. What do you think's a move maybe they could do before the draft that could really, I guess, move the needle to them becoming, I guess, favorites for the Super Bowl, I guess?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know he just got signed by the Bucs. I thought Ryan Neal was interesting as kind of a box safety they could have added opposite Nick Scott. Obviously, you had Daxton Hill in the fold who can move around a little bit. But I think I would also maybe take a flyer on another outside corner. If I look at the depth chart on defense, like the defensive line, I think people have talked about adding maybe another interior guy, maybe more depth at edge. But I think you do have like some draft picks that showed some flashes last year, and maybe you're more comfortable there. For me, it's another outside corner. I mean, Chidobe Awuzie, if he comes back healthy, is obviously a very, very good player. I think Cam Taylor-Britt got better as the season went on, is a really good player. But getting another, I like Sidney Jones addition, but has some injury history and some questions there. Maybe one more solid outside corner, depth piece, nothing crazy. And I can't even think of a name for it off the top of my head, but just, a flyer and a proven guy that's played some good football, to have his insurance.
Yeah, let me follow up there. I like that, man. I think a lot of Bengals fans are mocking cornerback in the first or second round too. So I think you're right on cue there. But is there maybe a safety that you would consider bringing at this point? Maybe a John Johnson or someone that I guess Nick Scott is Nick Scott. Someone that could help him if he doesn't turn out.
Nick Scott is Nick Scott.
Nick Scott is Nick Scott. Yeah, no, there are a bunch of veterans out there too. If you want to kind of have an older presence, I mean, Rodney McLeod's very old at this point, but was pretty good last year for the Colts. I think Deron Harmon is still unsigned, was pretty solid last year for the Raiders. And these guys are signing like 1 year, $2 million deals at best. And I apologize if one of those guys signed some already, but I don't think they have. So like guys like that, like wily old vets that are 30 years old, but they know the right spot to be. They're on the back end, keep everyone in line. I would look into those players as well.
So I've got one more question for you before we go. And another thing I wasn't going to ask you, but Tio and I were talking about it right before you jumped on, and you probably heard the back end of our Joe Mixon discussion. That's all the talk in Bengals land right now. And for all the things that we know about football, running backs don't matter. It's a big debate. So I think at this point, it's hard to imagine him playing on a $12.6 million cap hit or whatever he's projected to play on. It's somewhere around there. That's all I know. Your thoughts on that player in particular? Do you restructure? Do you cut? What does that look like in a perfect world if you're the Bengals and you're going through a smart, analytical sense, not the Bengals, we keep everyone for a little while longer because we're just nice to veterans sense?
Yeah, and this matters, too, for discussion of other players. So what I would try to do in the beginning is go to him and say, look, we can go the Aaron Jones route or we can go the Ezekiel Elliott route, right? He's at a $9.4 million salary. I think Zeke's was right in that area. Maybe it was 10.4. And then Aaron Jones, his contract kind of ballooned this year. And he had, I think he was owed $16 million in cash. That got brought down to 11. So, hey, we can take your $9.4 million salary. We'll still pay you, let's say, $6 million, $5.5 million, and we'll put incentives in there to get you back up to where you were. But we're not going to pay you $10 million, because the market is just not there. If we did cut you, I mean, look, Zeke is still unsigned and he's leaking out lists of teams he wants to play for, including the Bengals, and none of those teams, all three teams were like, I think that's his list, not our list, like immediately. Like it was kind of sad to a degree. Like, so I think you can leverage that a little bit and say, I mean, look, I think Dalvin Cook could get traded from Minnesota too. Like, it's clearly just not a good market right now for veteran running backs. And so I would do it before the draft and say, look, we can do it before and you'll be protected. And we'll take a running back in the 4th or 5th round. Or we'll be sitting there on early day 2, and a kid we love will be there. And you know what? Let's just get Zach Charbonnet and just cut Joe Mixon for nothing. Like, and so I think you have those conversations with him. You're honest with him. You're respectful. I'm not trying to be, funny at all, but those are the conversations you have. You're just a little bit more, serious and buttoned up about it. But that's what I would do. I would not pay him $10 million to be my running back next year.
No, I just don't think you can do it. I don't know how in 2023, or you just can't do it. I'm glad you made us feel validated because, we don't always feel validated talking about running backs on Bengals Twitter. It's a very delicate subject right now. Brad, you've been a fantastic guest. We don't need to go on and on about Bengals running back Twitter. Make sure you follow him at PFF Brad. He is just a fantastic resource. Great on free agency, great on contract value. He's going to be a great follow for all of you as the Bengals kind of go into these early extensions, especially with Joe Burrow, Logan Wilson, Tee Higgins. Thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Brad.